Welcome back. For the third installment of my tutorial series on To the Strongest, we're going to look at the combat mechanics within the rule system. And before I show you two armies duking it out, I'm just going to go over the basic charges available to your units and also how the basic shooting mechanics work within the rules. But before we demonstrate the combat, the melee, and the charges, let's talk about zones of control. So every unit has a zone of control, which is basically the grid box in front of them. Now, if you or your enemy enters into a zone of control, your unit has to halt, and if they are going to charge, they of course have to turn to face the enemy, or they can retreat back a grid if they do not wish to engage in combat. And this mechanic is basically used to stop units from moving across the front of a battle line. That wouldn't be very realistic. You'd just get flanked. And so knowing where your enemy's zones of control are important whenever you're planning out your strategy. So just keep that in mind. If you are on the attack and you're entering into a box in front of an enemy, you do have to stop and either engage in combat or retreat back. So now let's talk about the charges that are available to you in combat. So if I wanted to do an easy activation, a simple charge, I would simply charge an enemy in a box directly in front of my own unit. Now if I wanted to do a difficult activation, a difficult charge, that would be charging to a unit on your diagonal. So you see that unit diagonally from my Roman unit there. And you can do this as long as you don't have an enemy directly in front of you. It makes sense. If you were to charge diagonally while you had an enemy facing you, you're basically giving them your flank. So you cannot do that. So if you have a unit in front of you, you cannot charge diagonally. Alright? And again, it's considered a difficult activation. You'd have to draw a 1 higher card than a normal activation in order to complete that charge. Now let's talk about the charges that you cannot do. You must always be facing your enemy in order to charge them. So here if I'm facing directly ahead and these guys are facing the opposite direction, I cannot charge them. Same if we are directly side by side to one another facing different directions, I cannot charge that unit. I would first need to turn my unit to face them before I would be able to attack them on the flanks. So always keep in mind, you must be facing a unit in order to charge them. If not, then you must use activations to turn your unit. So now let's talk about skirmishing. For ancient rules, you'll really deal with two types of skirmishers, javelins and then slings or bows. So javelins have a range of 1 grid box, whereas bows and slings have a range of 2 grid boxes. So here if I put my archers here, they're able to shoot that unit 2 boxes away. And that also includes diagonals too. So if I were to move the unit over here, that is still within the range of my archers. Or if I was to move it even farther on the diagonal, that is still within the range of those bowmen right there. So it's important to know the range of your skirmishers when you're using them. Also, I can move them closer if they're 1 grid away. Obviously, I can still shoot at them. And the only other thing that dictates shooting is also line of sight. So as long as I'm on flat, even terrain and I'm able to see the unit in front of me, I am able to shoot at them. But if I were to here put a forest between my archers and that warband, I could not shoot at them because their line of sight is now blocked. Alright, same over here. Alright, or another option is if I have this hill over here and I put my troops behind that hill, the archers cannot shoot over that hill onto the warband back there because the line of sight is broken. Now, in addition to the line of sight and the range of a skirmisher, you also have to shoot at the units that are closest to your skirmishers first. Something to keep in mind. Now if I were to replace this unit of bowmen with this cavalry, now cavalry are often armed with 2 javelins. In order for them to strike at the enemy, they have to be 1 grid box away. Now, like cavalry have an interesting mechanic where they can move. then they can shoot, and then they can move again. Alright, but again, unlike bowmen, they have to be one box away right in front of the enemy to use their skirmish fire. Alright, and so that's the basic mechanics of charging and shooting. Now, we'll find out that there's a big difference on how easy it is to land melee hits versus skirmish hits. For melee, you will have to draw a card that is a 6, whereas for skirmishers, you'll have to draw a card value of at least 8 in order to hit your enemy. So skirmish fire is a little bit harder to land than melee. So let's go now, and I'll line up the troops and we'll fight around. So here we have some Romans versus some Germans. I broke up the armies in the same way I've been doing it the last 2 videos. I'll have 3 commands each with 2 attached generals, 1 detached, and each are in control of 3 or 4 troops. So the way you start a round in combat is very similar to how you start a round with movement. You're going to activate one of your commands, you're going to choose one unit from that command, and you're going to give them an order. Now if you're giving them an order to attack, you have to do 2 things. You have to first draw a card to see if you activate. If you activate on a 2 or higher, that means you are now able to charge. And when you charge, you will be able to draw a card to see whether or not your attack is going to land any casualties upon your enemy. In order to hit an enemy, to cause some damage, you will have to draw at least a card value of 6 or higher, as long as your unit has not yet been disordered. Once you land that card, if you do draw a 6 or higher, your enemy will have an attempt to save, to mitigate your attack, to repulse the charge, and each unit will be differentiated. So skilled units versus raw units will be differentiated based on the save value of that unit. So elite units will have a lower save value, meaning they draw a lower card and they can negate any casualties that might have happened to them, whereas raw units will have to draw a much higher card in order to avoid any casualties on a charge. So after you draw that 6 or higher, your enemy draws a save value. For Romans, they often save on a 6, whereas Celts save on a 7 or 8. And if they are not able to draw that save value, they become disordered. And becoming disordered is really problematic because once you're disordered, it counts as you taking some casualties, and you no longer hit on a 6. It now takes an 8 for you to cause a casualty on an enemy unit. And also, for Roman units, if you receive 2 disorders, if you receive 2 casualties, as it were, that unit is destroyed. Whereas these deep units for the Germans, they can receive 3 disorders, 3 casualties before they are destroyed. So when you become disordered, it limits your combat ability, and after multiple disorders, your unit will be destroyed, will be killed, driven off the field. Now there is something called rallying, which I'm going to save for another video to explain. It's complicated and there's some nuance to it, so I'm not going to focus on that for this run through. But no, that's kind of the process. So you draw a hit card, your opponent gets to save. Now anytime you charge or attack an enemy, they get to hit you back. So after you draw your hit card, you draw the save value for the opponent. Regardless whether they save or they take a casualty, they hit you back. So then you draw a card for your opponent. Now if they were not disordered, they hit you back on a 6. If you did end up causing disorder on that unit, they will hit you on an 8. And if they are able to land a hit, then you must draw a save card for your unit. And I know that sounds very complex, but as we go through and I'm drawing cards, you'll see it in action and you'll start to understand the flow of combat into the strongest. So let's go ahead. I'm going to activate my Romans first. So just as before, I am going to elect to activate my left flank command over here, led by that attached general. And as I said in my previous video, it's always smart to go ahead and activate your general first. In case you fail, in case you draw an ace, you can use your officer's ability to replay that card. So that's my kind of pro tip. Activate your general's unit first. So here, look at that, and I do draw an ace on my first attempt at activating. So normally that would mean my entire command's turn is over, but I'm going to use my officer's ability, this guy right here, to replay that activation. So I will need again a 2 or higher. Let's hope I do not draw another ace. So you can see how important those officer abilities are. Now I draw a 3 on the reactivation, and I am able now to activate. So I'm going to choose to charge the unit directly in front of me. Now each unit sometimes has a special kind of ability attached to it. Since these guys, as you see right here, are Roman legionaries, they are able to throw javelins on their first charge, throw their pila, which Romans in real life carried as kind of a shock weapon. So when I charge, I'll actually get to draw kind of 2 hit cards. One hit card for my projectile, my javelins, that will hit on an 8. And then another card for my melee charge, which will hit on a 6. So that's kind of a unique strategy that the Romans can employ. All right, so let's see what I draw. Oh, and I was lucky. All right, I drew look over here, I drew an 8 and a 6. So both of my attacks land. I needed an 8 for my skirmisher, for my skirmish fire with my javelin, needed a 6 on my melee charge. So now that unit will have to save twice in order to avoid becoming disordered. And since they are a warband, they will be saving on a 7. Now the warbands take more hits than the Romans, but they often have to draw higher save values in order to avoid becoming disordered. So again, I will now draw 2 cards to see if I'm able to avoid either of those hits. I draw a 2 and a 4. Very unlucky for that warband, and so they will be double disordered. They will take 2 disorder markers. I like to call them casualties. And so after I draw those save values, they now get to hit me back. Anytime you attack, your enemy gets a chance to inflict casualties upon you. But since they're disordered now, they will be hitting me on an 8 instead of a 6. So that first charge can be crucial, because if you do land a hit, it will be much harder for your enemy to respond in kind. So now I must draw a hit card for that enemy. Well, would you look at that? They do hit me back on an 8. Even though they are disordered, they were able to hit my legionaries, and so my unit will now have to save. This unit saves on a 6 or higher, so if I want to avoid becoming disordered myself, I have to draw at least a 6. Luckily, I do. I draw an 8, and so I avoid any casualties, and that round of combat is now over. Now I could, of course, attempt to activate that unit again. I would only need a 4 to attempt a second attack. But as I said in my last video, I always like to activate every unit in my command at least once before I activate a unit for a second time. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to activate my unit of heavy cavalry over there on the flanks. Now this unit of heavy cavalry is facing down a unit of light German cavalry. Now, light units cannot stand toe-to-toe with normal infantry or normal cavalry. Whenever they are charged, they must evade. So it's kind of like a save, the save value during combat. If a mounted unit is charged by another mounted unit, in order to evade, I will have to draw a 5 or higher and move away from that grid box. So that's something important to keep in mind. Unless you're on rough terrain, light infantry, skirmishers, or light cavalry cannot go toe-to-toe with normal troops. So I'm going to go ahead and activate these guys. I'll need to draw a 2 or higher, just as normal. I draw a 10. Remember, face cards are worth 10. So I am able to activate that unit, and of course I'm going to choose to charge that light cavalry in front of me. Now this unit will have to evade, so now they will draw an evasion card, a 5 or greater. They draw a 9, so they are able to move away from my charge. They move back 1 box, and since I charged them, my unit of cavalry will now have to occupy that box that the light cavalry had once occupied. So now that cavalry unit's in a pretty good position. If I can chase off the light cavalry, I can now attack from the flank. But I'm not going to activate the cavalry again because I need to draw a 10. Instead I'm going to go and reactivate those legionnaires I activated earlier in the turn. Now I'm not going to activate that small unit that you see sitting behind my general. Small units are great to kind of plug holes in lines. They're cheaper to field. They only take 1 hit though, but they're good for holding ground. If for whatever reason my legionaries were to lose in combat against the warband and be completely routed or destroyed, the warband wouldn't be able to occupy the box since I have that reinforcing unit, and they'd be able to hit back at the warband once that front unit was destroyed. So they're good for stopping your battle line from being broken by the enemy. So I draw another card to activate. It's a 10, so I'm able to activate the legionaries again. Now I'm unable to throw a javelin. I already used that ability up, but I will be able to hit on a 6 for my charge. I draw a 2, so I do not land my hit. Now regardless of whether you land a hit or not, your enemy still gets to attack you back. So even though I didn't land a hit on a 6, my enemy now gets a chance to wound my legionaries if they draw an 8 or higher. Unfortunately, they draw a 6, which would have been enough to hit my unit had they not been disordered. Again, if you're disordered, it takes an 8 to hit back. So that round of combat is over. So I'm going to go ahead and elect to activate that unit of cavalry one more time. I really want to drive off the light cav, so I'll be able to turn and flank that warband. So again, if I want to activate them, I will need to draw a 10 or higher in order to do that. So let me go ahead and draw a card here. Look at that, I draw a king, and so I am able to activate these guys for a second time. So again, I'm going to elect to charge that light cavalry unit. In order to avoid my charge, that unit will have to draw a 5 or higher. They draw an ace. They do not evade my attack, and so that unit of light cavalry has just been destroyed. Of course, I'll put down a casualty marker to remember them by, and I have to move into that box that they occupied. So next round, the Romans are looking in good position. Now I can activate that cavalry one more time. Again, you keep activating until you draw a lower card value than your previous activation. So I want to activate this cavalry one more time in the hopes of maybe turning them around and putting them in a position where they can flank that infantry. In order to do so, I will have to draw a 10. It is a difficult activation, but the maximum card value is a 10. So no matter if it's an easy or difficult activation, if you draw a 10, you're able to complete that action. So let's go ahead and see what I draw here. I draw a 5. So unfortunately that does not activate. I need a 10 or higher, and so my left command is over. They did some good work though that round. And I'll move over to my middle command led by this general here. So I'll use this opportunity to show some skirmishing going on. Here we have some slingers versus some bowmen. Again, each range of these skirmishers is 2 grid boxes, but both moved up with their armies and are shooting at each other point blank. Now for skirmishing, I'll again have to activate the unit with a 2 or higher. But in order to land a hit on those slingers, my bowman will have to draw at least an 8 in order to land a hit. Now another difference in skirmishing is that your enemy, unlike on a charge, cannot hit you back during shooting. Alright, so I'll be able to shoot, and if I hit, they simply have to save. If they do not save, they will be destroyed, since light units can only take 1 casualty. So look at that. I activate on a 9, and I draw a 10, which is a hit upon that skirmish unit. Now, skirmishers usually have a high save value. They save on an 8, but I was lucky. I drew a jack, which is worth a 10, and so that unit saves. Alright, so no casualties were sustained on that slinger unit. Now, I will have to subtract 1 from my ammunition. So I started with an ammunition of 4, and I use that dice to show that I now have 3 arrows left. So I don't want to attempt to activate that unit of bowmen again. I'd require a 10 in order to activate them. So I'm going to move over to this unit, sharing a box with my general. Now I'll need a 3 or higher to activate because I'm attempting a difficult activation. I am trying to charge into rough terrain onto that hill. Whenever you do that, you need a higher activation than normal. So as long as I draw a 3 or better, I will be able to successfully attack that unit on the hill. The unit on the hill will get a save bonus. If I hit them, they'll be able to save on a 1 lower card, since they get a defense bonus for being in rough terrain. Now I am able to activate. I draw a 9, and since these are legionnaires, I can, on my first charge, throw my javelins. So I'll be able to draw 2 hit cards at once. So I attempt to throw my javelins with a 5, I miss. I attempt to charge with a 3, I do not hit, do not land any casualties. Now they, of course, get to hit me back. As long as they draw a 6 or higher, they will land a hit, but they don't. They draw a 4. So with that round of combat is over. No casualties are sustained, no disorder markers placed. So now I will go to the next unit in my command. I don't want to activate that unit again. And here I'll activate this unit behind my light infantry. And as we talked about in my last video, I will move through that light infantry when activated. They're the only units you can do that with. So I activated them on a 4. Now I made an error here. You are actually allowed to charge through light infantry, and so I could have used that 4 to activate and charge up the hill. Instead, I activated once to move through them and activated them again to charge. I didn't need to do that. So here, when you see me drawing a 6 or higher in order to charge up on that hill, it was actually unnecessary. But there you go. I would have activated anyways. I'm charging uphill. So again, I will need a 6 or higher to hit that skirmish unit right there. And while normally that skirmisher would have to evade, that light unit would have to evade from the infantry, since I'm on rough terrain, I'm going to elect to hold my ground. The only time when you can fight normal troops head to head. My legionaries, though, they draw a 10, and so they do land a hit. In order to save, I'll have to draw a 7 or higher, but unfortunately I draw a 3. And since light units can only take 1 hit before they're destroyed, that unit of slingers are removed from the field, and we have that nice little casualty marker to show where they fell. Alright. And so with that, I will move on to the final unit in my command to activate. The unit over there on the right here. I'll need a 2 or better in order to activate that unit. I draw a 2. Alright, so now I'm going to draw a hit card with a 6 or better. I draw a 3 and do not hit. I didn't have any javelins because these are actually auxiliaries, so I wasn't able to use that special ability. But I did not hit them with the 3. They get to hit me back, and they do with a 10. However, I save on a 10, so that round of combat is over. Nobody takes any casualties, nobody takes any hits. Now, of course, I'm going to activate these guys again because I only need a 3 in order to reactivate. So I draw a 10, they activate. I'll draw a 6 plus for a hit. I draw a 1, an ace, so I do not hit the enemy. They get to hit me back. They hit me on a queen. Now I have to save on a 6 or better. I do not save, and so that Roman legionary, or that Roman auxiliary unit, takes a disordered marker. Alright, So in order for them to hit now, they will have to hit on an 8 instead of a 6. Now again, we could go ahead and rally that unit. We're going to do that on the next video. It's an interesting mechanic, and there's certain circumstances where it is very beneficial to attempt to remove that disordered marker. But I'm just going to go ahead here and try and activate these guys in the middle one more time, attacking up on that hill. They will need a 10 or better to activate. They don't activate, but I can use my officer ability right there to replay the activation. I have to get a higher value than my previous activation. I do not on a 2, and so my middle command's turn is now over. So I'll go ahead and activate my right flank, my last command for this turn. And as usual, I'm going to activate that unit with the general attached in case I fail to activate. But I draw a 6, and so I am going to charge that unit right in front of me. I hit on a 6+, and I land a 10, so they hit. They save on a 7+. They fail to save. They draw a 1. Now they get to hit me back. They do hit me back with a 10, but I save on a 9. So that round of combat is over, and now that unit is disordered. They will be hitting on an 8+ for the rest of the round. Now I'm going to go and activate my other unit over here, my cavalry. We have heavy cavalry versus heavy cavalry. I activate on a 10. Now I'm going to elect to throw some javelins here. I throw a javelin, it does not hit. I needed an 8 to hit, missed on a 7. So now I'm going to go back and activate my first unit again. I'll need a 7 or better to activate it. I draw a 10, so they are activated. I'll draw another 10 to hit, so I hit. I needed a 6 or better. I draw a 10 for their save of the enemy unit, so they do save. They draw a 7. Normally they would hit me, but since they're disordered, they need an 8 or better, and so that round of combat is over. So now I will activate another one of these units again. I'm going to try to activate the unit with the general one more time. I draw a 7, so I failed to activate, but I'm going to use my officer ability to attempt to replay that card. But I draw a 6, so the command's turn is now over. So hopefully now you have an idea about the basic combat mechanics into the strongest. You draw a card to hit. If you do hit, your opponent gets a chance to save, and then they get a chance to hit you back, and then you get a chance to save. It's the rhythm you'll be seeing throughout combat into the strongest. So now I'm going to show you how flanking works. So I have this unit of heavy cavalry on the side of that warband. I'm going to activate them with a 2. Now since I'm on the flank, I can draw 2 hit cards every time I charge them. You can see how big of an impact being on the flanks will have. You have a much higher chance of causing casualties and destroying units when of course you're attacking them from behind. So that warband there is in a lot of trouble. So now I will draw 2 cards. I draw a 2 and a 10, so only one of those cards will land a hit. So now that warband has to save, draw a save value of 7 or higher to avoid taking a casualty there. So the warband does save. It needed a 7 or better. It drew a 10. And so the unit is not destroyed. It does not take any casualties. So I'll reactivate that unit. I activate them on a jack, and unfortunately for the warband, I draw 2 hit cards. I draw a 10 and a 9, so they have to save twice. They save on one of them. They draw a 10 to save on one of the attacks, but they draw a 2 to save on the second, and so that warband is destroyed. And whenever you destroy a unit, you must move into the grid that it occupied, unless, of course, there was a second unit occupying that box. So here my cavalry move into that grid, and they'll be threatening the flank of those units on the hill. So that's basic combat in a nutshell. Hopefully from this video you now understand how you draw to hit, how you draw to save, and how your opponent is able to hit you back whenever you do make an attack, and also how skirmishing works. So in my next video, I'm going to focus on the rally mechanic, the way that you can remove some of those disordered markers if you so wish. It comes at a risk though. You have to use an activation, you have to draw your save value, and there's some modifiers that go along with raising or decreasing the value you need to rally. And I'll cover that in a very short video. It won't be nearly as long. If you've made it to this point, thank you for sticking through such a long video. I hope you found it was helpful, and I'll continue doing some more tutorials on advanced techniques and some more battle reports using this rule system. Anyways, until next time, keep playing with those toy soldiers.